Hey everybody, welcome back to Retro Modding News, my weekly video where I talk about what's new and upcoming in the world of retro console modding. First up this week, I wanted to make a correction regarding the RGB Blaster that I talked about last week, and I'm sorry for anybody who didn't buy this because I mentioned that it probably was not going to be compatible with the HD Retrovision Sega Genesis Model 2 cables. This RGB Blaster is a no-mod way of being able to get RGB output from an original Famicom, and it uses the Sega Genesis style mini DIN connector from the Sega Genesis Model 2. Crix had mentioned that it was not going to be able to output composite video, so I took that as it was not going to be compatible with the HD Retrovision cables, because HD Retrovision cables use the composite video line in order to get sync from converting RGB into component video. Race on Twitter asked Crix if it was going to be compatible with the HD Retrovision cables, and I had a conversation in my Discord that maybe it's possible that the sync from the sync pin is also on the composite video pin. While there may not be composite video on the composite video pin, if it has sync, that's all that the HD Retrovision cables will need in order to make the component video work. And Crix did confirm that sync is on the composite video pin, so I'm pretty sure that the HD Retrovision cables will work. However, I need to make a correction about me saying that you would have to use RGB cables instead. If you scroll down here a little bit more, Crix said that the RGB Blaster only outputs sync on pin 4. Francisco posted the pinout of the Genesis Model 2 DIN, and pin 4 is the composite video pin, and pin 5 is the normal sync, the TTL sync pin. For what it's worth, Crix mentioned that the sync is at 3.3 volts on this RGB Blaster and not the full 5 volts. So I think that will still be okay for the HD Retrovision cables, but it's a little bit of a different story for straight RGB SCART cables. I'll try to explain quickly what kind of cable you will probably need for the RGB Blaster for RGB SCART. Normally there's a few different ways that you can order SCART cables, but I would say the two most common ways are either C-Sync or Sync on Composite. Now, since the RGB Blaster has sync, but it's on the composite pin, I'm pretty sure that you would need a sync on composite RGB SCART cable. So you would need one like this retro access one that says Genesis 2 RGB SCART cable with composite video sync. So that would be RGB and then getting sync from the composite video pin, because that's what is populated, I guess, on the RGB Blaster. Or you can always go with the HD Retrovision component cables for the Genesis Model 2. I hope that wasn't super confusing. If you're still confused, feel free to leave a comment in the comments down below. Next up, there are a couple of announcements from Dan Kuntz from PixelFX. He mentions that the DC Digital Hardware 2 announcement is coming pretty soon. The production is almost finished, so I think that means the DC Digital Hardware 2 is coming pretty soon. So I'll bring it up again when PixelFX has an official announcement, but if you've been waiting for a new version of the DC Digital, it's coming pretty soon. On the same note, the PS1 Digital restock and the PS2 Digital launch are going to be happening in the first quarter of next year. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Jeff Chen, who has worked on a Phillips CD-i 450 power adapter. This thing looks kind of crazy. I'm just going to talk about it briefly. So let's hop over to the GitHub and check out this project. So the Phillips CD-i 450 or 550 used this strange power adapter that uses an RJ45 plug, which is like the same kind that is used on an Ethernet cable. And I guess that makes those power supplies sort of rare. So if you have an original and it's failing or something, it might be kind of hard to get a replacement because it is such an obscure power adapter. So Jeff has designed this sort of weird power adapter that uses two power adapters coming into it and kind of converts it to that RJ45 connector that plugs into the CDI. It's important to know that even though there are two of the same looking power inputs on the back here, you need to use two different power supplies. You can't just bridge or use a Y splitter to connect one power supply to both of those ends. You have to use two unique power supplies, and Jeff kind of outlines exactly what you'll need. You know, you can read the article here to know exactly what you're going to need to power this thing. And if you need to create your own RJ45 connector wire thing, you can create your own, but you have to wire it straight through. So it's not like the traditional sort of Ethernet standard if you're used to that. I believe you have to wire them the same way on one side and the other side instead of flipped like a normal Ethernet cable is. So I think this is a really cool project, and I actually really like the look of the case here. So if you are a Phillips CD-i 450 or 550 person and you need a power adapter, make sure you check out Jeff Chen's project here on GitHub. And for the big story this week, Crix has posted some new photos of the Turbo EverDrive Pro, which is the PC Engine and Turbo Graphics EverDrive that he's been working on. I'm not exactly sure if this is what the final design is going to look like because it just says Turbo EverDrive here, And maybe that's what the existing Turbo EverDrive already looks like. But this is going to be a Pro model that is also going to support the TurboGrafx CD games as well. We have a little bit of clarity about how we're going to get stereo output from this, because I think originally the HuCard version of this was only going to have mono audio. But Crix mentioned here that the stereo output will come from the cartridge detection pin. And he seems confident that you could pretty easily modify something like a spark plug, or Crix says that there's Amazon or eBay versions of those video expansion boards that plug into the expansion slot in the back. He says that it's pretty easy to modify those to get stereo output too. So I'm not sure if that means we're going to need an update to the spark plug, or maybe it's easy enough to just open that thing and sort of do a little bodge or something to get stereo audio, but we'll have to get more information about that when this comes out later. Crix also mentioned that the release date is going to be sometime in spring of next year, and the price is going to be somewhere between the EverDrive N8 Pro and the Mega EverDrive Pro. So if you're in the United States, that's somewhere between $184 and $259, so maybe around the $200-ish mark. And the last thing to note is that this will not be able to emulate the Super Graphics. So if you have a Super Graphics console, you can use this EverDrive Pro to play Super Graphics games, but if you have just a normal PC engine, you will not be able to use the EverDrive Pro to emulate the Super Graphics. So that is one advantage that the Super SD System 3 is going to have over this. In another tweet, Crix mentioned that there is going to be an expansion port version of this new EverDrive Pro, but that's going to be released later on. I don't think they've mentioned anything about what the features are going to be on the expansion port version. I don't think that there's going to be an HDMI port like the Super SD System 3, but maybe there might be an RGB output instead. That's it for this week, but check out this video to see Hyperkin's Xbox 360 controller announcement. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.